We are going to continue with lesson 9, part 3. I see some really interesting suggestions in the chat about how can we let people know so that they're not guessing what the requirements are about the password. It is frustrating to go through the process of creating a password only to find out it doesn't meet the requirements. So easy way to do this, I think what I'm just going to do is put some instructions up on the top of the form. That's an easy way to do it, is we can just put in a banner here with some instructions. So underneath my H1, above my form, I'm going to put in let's see, a paragraph tag. Actually, I could even do it as a heading. Maybe H2 class equals. And I'll use alerts and alert secondary, so it's in gray. Passwords. Plus 8 characters. Including 1 digit, 1 upper, one. Okay, so we'll just put in an instruction so users know when they're looking at the form that. Okay, that's probably a little too big, an H2 tag. H5. Or maybe I'll just use a paragraph tag. That's probably okay. Okay, so now our users don't have to guess. Still even a little big, maybe I'll make it H6. So now they know. And yes, there is an extra challenge. So I've given you a JavaScript library you can use. It actually checks the strength as you type and uses jQuery. So you need to add jQuery, and you would put in a little indicator so it would change color and change as you type the password. It would show you. So you can use that if you want to. Here's the link. Again, you might just need to do a hard refresh to get the CSS to show up. Okay, so I'm going to return to the save registration. You would use it, but you'll have to add some HTML elements. You'll have to add jQuery as well in order for it to work. Okay, so once we've got a good set of inputs, we've got a username, we've met the password requirements, the user is confirmed they've entered the same password twice. Before we save them, we need to check to make sure we don't already have that username. So our connection is simple. Right, we'll require our database file. Really struggling with my syntax today. Coffee hasn't kicked in. So first we're going to set up a query. Select star from users where username equals. And we're going to set up a username parameter. Right, so we are checking for this username. We'll prepare a database command. We're going to need to bind the parameter, right? We're going to need to fill our username parameter with the username from our form. So we'll call bind param. We're going to fill our username parameter with our username variable. And I think we made our username, 50 characters. So we'll define that as a 50-character parameter. Then we can execute our command and fetch the results. And now we'll say user equals. We're only getting one record back at the most, so we can use fetch. We don't need to use fetch all. Paramvir, I'm surprised by that. I wouldn't think so because the command variable doesn't actually get created. It's being created here, right? This prepare statement. But okay, I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for that info. I didn't know. I would think we were creating the command first before we could call methods on it. So I'm not quite sure how that works. That doesn't actually make sense to me, but good to know. So this will run our query. Okay, this will run the query. So now we need to check, does this query return a user or not? So we just say, if there is a user, I think we want to check. Bear with me for a second. There's a few different ways we can do this. I just want to think for a moment about best way to do this. There's a few different ways we can check that user. So bear with me for a minute. I think we can probably check if it's empty. Okay, we can, this will just tell us if this user object is null. I think this would be good enough. So if our query returns a user, our user will not be null. If this username doesn't exist in the database, this variable should be null. So if we have a user, we want to now print out an error message. We'll try it this way. So we will say that the user already exists. In this case, we actually don't need to do anything else. We don't need to say okay equals false because we're just going to stop. So in this case, we'll say our database connection is null. We'll just disconnect here and we call exit. So this is stop executing this block of PHP. No, we're only selecting one record because we're selecting only filter for this username. So there won't be multiple records with the same username. So we don't need fetch all, we just need fetch. It's only returning one record. One or none. So we shouldn't have to do anything if we find a user with this username. We can just stop here. we'll continue to execute the code if this username doesn't already exist. Because the table is called users. That's the table name in the database. We are querying this table. Right. And then if the object we get back, we are calling a user singular. So now we're going to use a PHP hashing algorithm to hash the password. Well, because it's a single object. Okay. So we'll convert our password. PHP has this handy method called password hash, and it takes two parameters. The first is the string we want to hash, and the second is a hashing algorithm. So we're going to take our password variable, and we're going to use, you'll see there's a number of different algorithms, but the recommended best practice is to use password default, which we can look up here. So here's the documentation on password hashing. It describes the different algorithms. Simplest thing is to use the default if we don't provide it. And this will allow, if PHP updates over time and they make additional changes, we'll automatically get those changes if we use password default. So at the moment, it says our resulting hash should store more than 60 characters, and they recommend 255, which is what we did. Okay, so the resulting length can change. So the rest of our code is now just normal PHP code. We can use the same database connection. We don't have to disconnect, so we don't have to reconnect. We'll set up a new SQL statement. I'm going to change the SQL variable to insert into users. Now we only need to insert into the username and password field. We don't have to save the confirm value. That's just to ensure the user typed their password in properly twice. We are not saving the password twice. So we're just going to insert the username and password. Thank you. Good catch, Belinda. Yes, Paramveer. So this converts. So for example, password 1234, it will look something like that. So again, we're going to create the command, and then we'll have to bind the parameters. So we'll now need to fill the username and password parameter again. So our username will come from our username variable. There will be 50 characters. Well, we're going to do that later. The login is separate. Before we can do logins, we're going to take it one step at a time. So you're thinking in the right way. But first we need to, we'll look at that. It's a good question. So yeah, how are we, if we store this, how do we log them in? We will come to that. There is a way. So I'm glad you're thinking about that. We're going to bind the password to our password variable, which has been converted. It's been updated using a hashing algorithm. And we'll follow the guidelines that we should allow up to 255 characters. I don't think our password will be 255. I think currently the algorithm, I think it will give us a password that's 128 characters right now, but we're going to try it in a minute, so we'll see. And then we will simply call execute. This will actually, when line 52 runs, this should save that new user to the database, and their password should have been hashed or changed from plain text into a long hashed string. For the moment, I'm going to leave the redirect out because I want to see if this works. If we get an error message, we want to see the error message. We will add in the redirection once we're confident. We can register, and then if we try to register a second account using the same username, we also want to make sure that we will get our user already exists error. Parmveer, that's a very good question. We're going to come to that as well. You're asking really intelligent questions, right? So what happens if we create users with two different usernames, but they use the same password? We're actually going to try that so we can see how that hashing algorithm works. Okay, so let's try it like this. We're going to get one of two results if we enter a valid set of inputs. We're either going to get, or I guess there's three possibilities. We're going to get a message that says the user exists. We'll get a blank screen, or we'll get an error. So let's go, and what we'll do is we'll all use the same credential. That's going to make life a little easier because we're going to have to be logging into the site now regularly for the rest of the semester. So the easiest way is if we all just create the same username and password. So on the register form, here's what we're going to use. For the username, use test@test.com. That'll be our user, our first user. For the password, let's put in capital T, test1234, which I'll also put in the chat. So test1234, and the first character must be in uppercase. So this will meet all the password rules. So what I'm going to do is click register. We should get an empty page, and then we can go and look in the database and see if our user account got created, and then we can also see what that hashed password will look like. So I'm going to click register. I'm going to save it. So I got a white page. Belinda, you can do that as an extra challenge. Basically, there's a script that would in JavaScript toggle. You toggle the input type from password to text. And then to hide it, you would toggle in JavaScript, sorry, here, you would have to toggle the input type from text back to password. Well, it wouldn't be Bootstrap because that's CSS. You actually have to modify, use the DOM. You'd have to modify this object using the DOM. So there is a way to do it. You can try that as an extra challenge. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll have time to go over it. So I'm going to look in my database now. And I'll run the query, select star from users, and let's see if the registration actually worked. Okay. So we didn't get an error. But we didn't get an error. We didn't get a warning. So let's see, what did we miss? You got an error. Sarah's worked. Um, Insert into users. Our fields are called username and password, our parameters. We didn't get this message. Interesting, no errors. I'm just going to try it again. Refresh and resend. On the execute line. Yours worked. I shouldn't need to, but I'll try it. Have users, but I have no one here. Interesting. Let me describe my table. So this worked for many of you. That's good. I have a primary key. It can't be null. Username and password. I'll just make sure. Well, this is how we learn when weird things happen. Just for the moment, I'm going to comment out my duplicate check here. Just to see what's going on. I'm just going to comment this part out. I wonder if it's this exit statement somehow. I'll maybe just print a little confirmation message here as well. So at least I know if it saves, I should get a message. Okay, so I should get a message in gray. Refresh. Okay, tells me it's saved. I think this will work. All right, so it did work. But I've got to figure out something's wrong with obviously my duplicate check is preventing it. Interesting. Yeah, I think it's the exit is running in here. Okay, so I think instead of my exit, I'll use an else. I think my exit is what's breaking it. Maybe, Belinda, I'm just going to try it this way. I'm going to move all the rest of the code into an else statement. I'm not entirely sure, but this should fix it. And then we'll address the question about the passwords. So I'm going to try two things. First, I'm going to try and sign up again with the same username. Okay, you've got the same code. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to register again. I'll put in a different password. Use password 1234. So I should get a yellow message here. Okay, so that's good. So it's not letting me sign up again. with the same username. So I'm going to put in a different user this time. I'll do user@gc.ca. But this time I'll use that same password. So we can also check what happens if two users enter the same password. How does the hashing work? Okay, so it says saved. I'm not exactly sure. I think the exit was breaking it. If it's working for you, you don't have to rewrite yours. So now when I look in my user table, we're going to see something interesting. So notice I used the same password, but each of them has a different value. I think you can also try return. So even though I put in the same password twice, I get a unique hashed value for each. So how does this work? How is it going to, when two people enter the same password, how does the hashing work that they get converted into different values? Well, you'll notice the first few characters are the same. So these describe the hashing, what algorithm was used, what process. The other thing that the password hash method does is it does what's called salting. So I'll show you a visual. And let's see if we can find it. So how does salting work? So when we salt it, we take the original password. So if we hashed but didn't salt, then two users with the same password would also have the same hash value. This obviously isn't very secure. What salting does is it uses a random string in the algorithm to ensure that each hash value is unique. So we can also see, for example, here, we take hello, we add a salt to it, and then this random string gets included in the hashed value. So this method that we've used in PHP, this password hash, it automatically does the salting. So it will add a random string onto the user's password before it hashes it. So this guarantees that all the passwords are unique. Now, how long are these strings? Well, let's compare them. So for example, if I stick in the file, so this is, so right now the current algorithm gives us a 60 length password, but it may be updated in the future so that those hash values are longer. Shashank, that's a good question. We're going to use another PHP method that takes care of that automatically for us. It's linked to, the salt is included somewhere in the algorithm. So we're going to see that next. So our register page is working now. I know it's acting a little funky, but so it will check for duplicates. It will allow us to register if the username is unique, and it will hash our password to generate a 60-character password that is unreadable. So this password, the original password, can never be retrieved and displayed in plain text. Okay, so now we're going to go over to our login. Okay, great. We've still got time to work on our login. So our register is working. We can sign up now. On our login page, it's going to post to a page called validate.php. So this is, we're going to need to build this page just like we built our save register page. So this is going to check whether this username exists in the database. I'll go back to my file explorer and I'm going to create validate.php. put on a set of PHP tags. This is a hidden page. The users will never see this page. So we don't actually even need our header. And we don't even really need a closing PHP tag. That's the convention. Sorry, we do need it because it's its own. So first we'll put on the comments here. So the first thing is we will connect down at the very bottom. Yes, you could if you wanted to. So we're going to connect. Actually, sorry, before we connect, we should capture login form inputs. We don't need to validate them because we're not saving anything to the database. If the user doesn't enter anything, the login will fail. So that's fine. We don't need to validate them. We just need to capture them. We're going to connect to the database. We are going to use a built-in PHP method to hash and compare passwords. Sorry. We will connect. We will fetch the user based on the username. What should happen if the username is not found? We give them an error message, and what should they see in the screen? We could ask them to register. What do most websites do if you put in an invalid credential? What page do you usually get taken to? If you log in and the login fails, we don't usually go to an error or register page, and we could do those things, but what page do we usually get? Well, what would be most convenient? Right, Tyler, we want to give them, maybe just made a typo. So the easiest thing is show them the login page. With an error. So if we don't find them, the username doesn't exist, we're going to take them back to login, but we also want to show an error at the top of the login form. If they are found, so if the username is found, we're going to use a built-in PHP method to compare and hash the passwords. Passwords match. We will redirect user to movies page. If passwords don't match, display login page with an error. And before any of our redirects, we will disconnect from the database. Okay, so there's three possibilities here. First possibility is the username we don't find, take them back to the login page and show them an error. Second possibility, we found the username, and when we hash the passwords, they match, we're going to take the user off to the movies page. Actually, I guess we'll maybe do this first. We'll check our errors first. If we find the username, but the password is bad, again, we're going to go to the login page. Okay, so here's all our logic. Again, we're going to use our post array to read our form values. We cannot use get here for logins. These will not be secure. Our form must use post. We don't want to see username and passwords as URL parameters in our browser address. And I'm going to add one more step. Before, we're going to store user identity in a session. We will talk about sessions and cookies in a minute. So our connection is easy. So then we're going to go and look up this user. Okay? Do we know who the user is? So with PHP, we don't actually check the username and password together. First, we're going to check the username. If we find it, then we will deal with checking the password second. So this is going to be the same query. Yeah, I think it is. This is going to be the same query we used on our save registration. Before we created a user, we were checking, did their username already exist in the database? So we are going to star from users where username equals, and we'll set out our username parameter. We'll prepare our command. And then we'll need to, of course, bind the username parameter to the username variable to prevent SQL injection. Populate the username. It is a 50-character string. No, because the logic, I guess you could if you wanted to. Paramveer, I'm not going to, but if you wanted to, you could. Yes, it would work. We'll execute our query. And again, like we did on our other page, we will call the fetch method because we're only selecting one user. When we're writing procedural code, the variable is the entire page cycle, is the entire life cycle of the page. Unless you are creating functions, but we're writing procedural PHP. In procedural PHP, we're not using really classes or objects. We're not using functions. So a variable lives the entire life cycle of the page if your code is procedural. If you're using functions or classes, then the variables are scoped to those functions or classes where they're declared, just like they would be in other languages. So again, we'll say if our user actually, maybe we'll do it this way. We'll say if not user. So if there is no user with this username, yep, that makes sense. If there's no user found, then we want to redirect to login.php, but we're going to add a parameter on here that says invalid equals true. So not only do we want to take them back to the login page, but we want to pass a parameter so that we can display an error message on the login page, right? Be pretty confusing as a user. We try to log in and the login page just reloads, but there's no indication as to why. You know, we won't know, did we put in an invalid credential or is the login page not working? So let's just try. Actually, I guess in this case, we can also disconnect. So if we don't have the username, we don't need the database anymore. We can just disconnect and go back to the login page. Let's try this code out first. And we can test it by putting in an invalid username. So I'll go to login. I'll put in a user that doesn't exist here. So I know this username doesn't exist. Thank you, Tyler. Nice to have 30 talented debuggers with me. So when I log in, I get brought back here, but I get this parameter. It says invalid equals true, but there's nothing to indicate that my login was invalid. So we're going to want a little bit of code up at the top of our login form that if we have a parameter that is invalid equals true, we want to display an error message in one of those yellow alerts. So we're going to add a little bit of code. It is working so far. So if I use a valid login, it takes me to validate, where we'll have to continue on. But if I put in an invalid username, it brings me back here. This is my browser. Yeah, I told this page in my browser, I said, remember my credentials, so I don't have to keep typing them. But normally, yes, they would be cleared out. No, we don't let them edit. Somebody should have to re-enter their login. Yeah, this is only because if I do this in a private window or I do it in another browser, you won't see this. If I go back to login, if I go to Chrome and do this, you won't see it repopulate. It's blank. So let's add a little bit of code on our login that if the username is invalid, we're showing a yellow error message here. So let's go to login. And here's what we'll do. We'll show, so on our register page, we added this gray instruction here using alert secondary. So we'll make our login page, when the user first comes here, they get a gray message. And that message will change from gray to yellow if the login is invalid. No, we're never going to let them edit. They're going to have to re-enter their credentials every time. So, let's see, how do I want to do this? Okay. We're going to put on a set of PHP tags here because we're going to put in some logic. If there's an error, we want to display an error message in yellow. If there's no error, we just want to display instructions in gray. So we will say if, we'll use if empty, get invalid. So if there is no error message that says invalid, then we will echo this, H6. So if we have no error message, we're going to print a message in gray that says, please enter credentials. So this is what users will see when they click on the login link. They'll get a gray message. Nope. It's get. Because this is the case where we have no parameter. So if it's empty, we want to show this message in gray at the top. If that invalid parameter is not empty, we're going to toggle this mess. We're going to change the message and change the color. So if we have an invalid parameter, I'm going to use a different class here. I'm going to use alert warning, which is yellow, and say invalid login. We're not going to tell them why. We never say, is it a bad password or bad username? That's too much info to provide a potential hacker. If the login fails for any reason, we're just going to show a yellow error message. Okay, so when I click login, I come to the login page, I get this message in gray. Please enter your credentials. If I put in an invalid login, so this user doesn't exist in my database, notice my message toggles from yellow to gray and the instructions change. Right? If I reload, I'll get my gray message back. So when we have that invalid parameter, that's telling us to show the user an error message here. Okay, so we're printing one of two instructions. When the user's first arriving on the login page, we're showing them a gray message that tells them to enter their credentials. But if we've tried their login and it failed, and we've brought them back here with a parameter that says invalid in our URL, we're going to show them a yellow error message instead. And now we can go back to validate. So we want to finish. So if we find the username, we now will say password equals, we're going to use a method called password verify. So this will take care. So Ram, and I think you asked. So we're going to verify the password, and we are comparing it to our user password. So we're checking the password the user entered in the login form and the password that comes from our database query, right? We're selecting the user. So this will take care of the hashing, and it will compare them together and tell us if they're the same. So actually what we'll do, sorry, I'm going to wrap this in an if statement. Sorry. We're going to say if, and we're going to say if not, password verify. So if these two passwords don't match, if they don't match, then we're going to do the same thing here. Disconnect. And go back to the login page with an invalid indicator. No, it's because remember, this user object, it's an array. So we are referencing the password column from our query result that's stored in the user object. So this is the password value that's being retrieved in our SQL query up here on line 10. So we're comparing the password in the database to the password entered in the login form and hashing them with password. So if they're not equal, so if this fails, password verify, so it says it returns true if the password and hash match, or false otherwise. So we're using if not. So now I'm going to try my login with a valid username, but an invalid password. And again, I should get this. Come back to my login. So I'll try test@test.com, but I'm not going to use the right password. Password 123. Okay. I didn't enter test 1234. So this should reload my login page, and I should get a yellow error message. My username was correct, but the password wasn't. So lastly, what do we want to do if the username is good and the password is good? In this case, we're going to call session start. We'll talk about sessions and cookies because we don't want to store it in a variable. We just want to call this method that returns true or false. So take the password entered in the login form, compare it to the password from the database query, hash them and see if they're the same. We must call session start before using session variables in PHP. So we're going to call session start, and then we're going to create a session variable. So I'm going to use the session object here. And we'll create a session variable called username. So we're going to take this user's email address, we're going to store it in a session variable. So we can access it on any page. So we could use sessions or we could use cookies. I had planned on allocating some more time to discuss the differences, but we'll just use the chat quickly. Why are we going to use sessions to store users? Why are they more commonly used than cookies? What's the difference? We could use a session, we could use a cookie, but why are sessions considered safer? Yes, they are more secure, Paramveer, that's right. Why are they more secure? Where are session variables stored and where are cookie objects stored? Right. The cookies are stored in your browser as text files. Where are the sessions stored? Yeah, on the web server, in server memory. So why would the sessions be more secure than the cookies? If sessions are stored on the web server and cookies are stored on our users' web browsers. Right, because users can't read them or access them on the server. Whereas we can view the cookies in our browser and we can delete them, we could try to modify them. Now, normally in modern sites, cookies are typically encrypted, but users could still try to access and decrypt them. So the sessions are more secure, and the sessions will also end when we close our browser. So we don't stay logged in. So any website, you know, websites, when you log in, they give you a checkbox and they let you stay logged in, like Facebook. Terrible idea. Yes, it's convenient as a user, but it's creating your user identity in a cookie. So if someone steals your device, they're already logged in because you've got a login cookie. If you don't stay logged in, if you log in every time, you're using sessions, and that's much more secure. So if someone accesses your device, they can't impersonate. So we want to store the user in the session, but that session is only active so long as the browser is open. As soon as they close the browser, or the sessions will time out, typically after 20 minutes, if they are inactive. So that's more secure. Cookies can persist for years. So we don't typically use them. If you save your login credentials so you don't have to use it again, that's a cookie. Because the cookie can survive even if you close your browser or shut down your device. A session will not survive. So a session makes you log in every time you come back to the website. That's more secure. The session is stored in the web server memory. We're creating a new session and we're storing the username in a new session variable. It's stored in web server memory. And that memory will be open until the user logs out or closes their browser, or if the session times out from inactivity. Okay, so now we can disconnect. Last 2 lines of code. I know we're really pushing the limits of time here. And we will go to movies.php. Now I know we haven't secured the resource yet. We'll do that next week. But we had to do all of this work to register and log in before we can add any sort of access control. So if I enter a valid username and password, I should get the movies page. Let's try it out. So I'm going to enter test.test.com. And now I go to the movies page. Yes. No, this is a session. It's not a cookie. If I close my browser, I'm going to be logged out. We didn't use a cookie, right? There is a cookie object, but we didn't use it. No, we're not using cookies at all. It's like a cookie paramvir. It's actually built into the browser, however. All web browsers have the ability to save a password. So it works like a cookie, but it's not actually a cookie. Good question. It's just a feature of the web browser. Web browsers have their own store of usernames and passwords. It's like their own database. Not for really secure sites. I'll use it for this, like for my banking sites, for example, or my credit card. I would never tell the browser to save my credentials. You should. Test 1, 2, 3, 4 is the password. So any really sensitive site, no, you do not want your browser to remember your credentials. Well, no, the goal, Tyler, next week, see, right now, anybody can still add, edit, or delete. So the goal is to restrict access so only an authenticated user can add, edit, and delete. An anonymous user can only see the list of movies, but they can't change anything. Yes, paramvir, that feature is separate from cookies and sessions. Okay, it is 11 o'clock. So we've got a working registration and login. We don't still have any access controls. We will continue on with this next week. Yes, Tyler, there's basically authenticated users and the public. The public can read the data. Any authenticated user can change the data. That's how we'll do it. Okay, I will upload to GitHub. I'll get our videos posted. You do have a quiz for next week. So for next week, make sure you've completed the Miro board. You understand the difference between sessions and cookies and hashing and encryption. You should go through the coding we've done today. Start your assignment 2, and there is a quiz in the lesson 10. Okay, I will upload the video and to GitHub. I will set you free. If you have other questions, feel free to send me an email or book an office hours appointment. Okay, but I will have to get running along. I've got another class coming up at noon. So have a good week, everyone.